I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who will do more to frame today's conversation. Jim Lockhart, who many of you know, is Vice Chairman of W.L. Ross & Company, LLC, and the co-chair with former Senator Kent Conrad of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Commission on Retirement Security and Personal Savings. If you haven't already read the Commission's report, I highly encourage you to do so. It's a great collection of smart and pragmatic policy recommendations. Jim's full bio is in your packets, as are the bios for all the speakers today. But I'll note that it's very impressive, and that he once served as a lieutenant on a nuclear submarine, which I did not know. So we'll be sure to ask him about that later. Jim, thanks so much for being here, and the podium is yours.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the plug for our report. We always like plugs like that. So. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm glad that we at the Bipartisan Policy Center could co-host this event with our friends at Aspen and Pew, both of which are doing terrific work on retirement security. There are a great many issues grabbing headlines these days, but today's subject, the challenges employees and owners of small businesses face in the area of retirement security, matters to hardworking people in this country and will continue to matter, hopefully even after some of the flashier, messier stories have faded. Indeed, a recent Gallup poll found that about 54% of working-age Americans are either very worried or moderately worried about not having enough money for retirement. These concerns cross generations. One found that a much higher share, 76% of retiring baby boomers, are worried they haven't saved enough for retirement. Our friends at EBRI use a detailed model to project that 40% of Generation Xers will run out short of money in retirement. People can choose for themselves whether they want to call this a crisis, but I think we can all agree that there is a significant problem here. And despite the fact that the younger generations will need to rely more on their defined contribution savings for retirement income than their parents did, a recent report from Vanguard found that employees under age 25 have actually lowered their savings in recent years, not increased them. Now, I would be remiss to imply that the current system is broken for everyone, because that is not the case. By far, too many Americans have been left behind. As we will address today, this is especially true for employees of small businesses. As David said, we have known these flaws in the retirement system for decades. Over the years, many of us inside and outside of government have devoted our time to improving policy in a way that will enable more Americans to live comfortably in retirement. In a recent example, as David mentioned, Senator Conrad and myself and a terrific group of commissioners at the Bipartisan Policy Center have been attempting to raise awareness around these topics because, unfortunately, amidst the breaking news about tax reform, health care, tweets, America's growing retirement program problems are getting buried. Hopefully, our discussion today will help rectify that. Our commission at the BPC released its comprehensive final report last summer entitled Securing Our Financial Future. I won't go into all the details today, but again, I encourage you to look at it. One of the keys to our commission work was recognizing that small businesses are central to the gap in accessing to retirement savings. Overall, about 2/3 of all U.S. workers have access to workforce plans, but less than 30% of employees in small businesses do. Small businesses defined as less than 100 employees. And while businesses with over 100 employees the employees have about 80% availability. So there's a real divide there at the 100 employee level. And in my opinion, it's really unacceptable that tens of millions of American workers lack access to workplace retirement plans. Because all Americans I believe, should have at least a minimum ability to save efficiently for retirement. And as you know, much of this shortfall can be attributed to the substantial burdens small employers face when attempting to establish retirement plans. These obstacles, financial, administrative, legal, make it difficult for employers to offer plans even if they want to. The challenges they encounter include selecting the plans, maintaining records, hiring trustees, considering fiduciary liabilities, and negotiating and paying relatively high fees. As a result, offering retirement plans is often too expensive and time-consuming for many small businesses who want to spend their time running their businesses. At one point in my career, I actually started a small business, a risk management firm, and we did start on a 401k, but it was extremely expensive and burdensome. And so I really understand that there is a significant issue there. As we will hear from our first panel, the latest research backs this up. Without stealing the thunder from our friends at Pew, their recent survey of small business owners found that of those businesses not offering retirement plans, most cited the main reason as their either expense or administrative burden of a 401k plan. Once again, these figures highlight the need for meaningful policy reforms. Key to solving these problems, in our commission's view, was establishing what we called a retirement security plan. It's really a version of an open multiple employer plan wherein small businesses can pool together nationwide and offer a plan run by a third-party administrator. Retirement security plans would also remove the fiduciary responsibility of offering a retirement plan from small businesses. Under these plans, offering a qualified retirement plan would only require the employee to really forward the payroll contribution, providing a retirement plan simple for small businesses. The corner hardware store is in the business of providing people with tools and supplies, not studying up the intricacies and liabilities of a retirement plan. Unfortunately, much of the recent retirement policy focus on Capitol Hill has been focused on tax reform. The possibility of so-called Rothification for 401ks has alarmed many stakeholders and will likely resurface even if not acted upon this time around. But I'm excited to share with you that we are right now we at the Bipartisan Policy Center are providing support to several bipartisan members of Congress who are drafting legislation that would truly help small businesses provide their employees with greater retirement security. As you'll hear today, our solutions are not the only solutions. Many others exist. We are pleased to have a full slate of very high caliber experts to share their valuable insights, including perspectives from small business, industry, public officials who are working to expand access via state-run retirement plans. The cutting-edge innovations and research discussed by the panels today have the potential to dramatically increase access to retirement benefits for small businesses. Together, we will show that the goal of expanding retirement plans to the hardworking owners and employees of small businesses is really within reach. With that, I thank you again for being here, and I'd like to welcome up John Scott and the first panel.
Thank you, Jim. It's great to be here, and I just want to say, again, thanks to our co-organizers, the Aspen Institute and the Bipartisan Policy Center, and especially to David Mitchell, who did a great job pulling all this together on behalf of Aspen. As Jim mentioned, we do have a great panel of experts here, and we're going to focus with this first panel on barriers to offering retirement benefits. And as David mentioned, the bios are in your handouts, so I won't go through those today, but I am joined by, at the far end, Rhett Buttle, who's a senior fellow of the Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program and principal at Public-Private Strategy. And then we have Holly Wade, who's director for research and policy analysis at the National Federation of Independent Businesses. And then to my immediate right, Ellen Gutierrez, who's the associate administrator of the Office of Entrepreneurial Development and Small Business Administration. So the format is going to be largely conversational. I will start off with a few high-level points that will just basically follow that slide. That's my only slide, which for people who know me, that's an achievement. Keep it to one slide. So just some points from some recent survey work that we have done around small businesses. And then I'm going to be turning to my fellow panelists to sort of get their perspectives on the barriers that small businesses face in trying to offer retirement benefits to their workers. So Pew did a survey of small business owners and key decision makers. This was done over 1,600 small businesses. The average firm size was 28 employees. And we sampled both those that offered retirement plans and those that did not. We really wanted to get both sides of that picture. So that first bullet, retirement benefits are not first. This is one of the things that we learned is, retirement plans are not the first offering that businesses typically offer. In our sample, it's a little more than half offered a plan. Many businesses are much more likely to offer paid time off and health insurance, which makes sense. When you're starting a business, you're going to be offering benefits that have an immediate value or need from your workforce. But at some point, businesses do get around to offering retirement benefits. So why do some offer plans and why do others do not? In terms of plan sponsorship, our survey identified a few key characteristics associated with offering a plan. For example, when employers reported that earnings increased a little or a lot over the past 2 years, they were 41% more likely to offer a plan than if earnings had remained flat. In addition, a firm with more full-time workers is more likely to adopt a plan than a workforce that's more evenly divided with full-time and part-time workers. And incorporated businesses are almost twice as likely to offer a retirement plan than unincorporated businesses. So I think you can see a theme there around sort of financial stability and growth as being sort of key factors. The other question is, when is a firm likely to start a plan? Well, the chance of offering a plan is quite low at startup, we found, but it does increase as a firm grows in size, whether that's the number of employees or the age of the firm. But that probability begins to level off when a firm reaches about, for example, 75 employees, and a similar dynamic is in terms of the number of years in business. So these results suggest that businesses tend to adopt plans during a middle phase of growth. After startup and during a period of expansion, at such times, a retirement plan might be an attractive tool for hiring and retaining talented employees when they've already provided those immediate benefits that I mentioned, like health insurance. But at a certain point, the likelihood of adopting a plan does not change, despite continued growth.
So then we get down to, I can now hear myself. So in terms of the main reasons for offering a plan, why do small businesses offer benefits, retirement benefits? In our survey, employers could indicate more than one reason for offering a plan, but then we asked them to indicate the main reason for offering a plan. Almost all, 96%, cited a desire to help employees save for retirement, and 48% identified it as the main reason. And this really solidified things we heard in focus groups that we conducted around the country, that these business owners, because they're small, they see their workers every day, face to face, and they get to know them, and there's a real desire to help them be financially whole. The second main reason that was cited at 31% was attracting and retaining workers. And then other reasons like tax advantages or employee demand were not nearly as important to our sample of small business owners. So, barriers to starting a plan. We asked why, if they didn't have a plan, why they didn't offer one. As Jim mentioned, the top two reasons were it was too expensive to set up and a lack of administrative resources for maintaining a plan. And you can understand with small businesses, the owner or the manager, they're wearing different hats, and something as complex as a retirement plan is a lot to take on. So I think that second reason of lack of internal resources is an important one. In terms of motivations for starting a plan, we wanted to know what would cause those non-plan sponsors to start offering one. And 67% said increased business profits would make them somewhat or much more likely to start a retirement plan in the future. And 60% said they would be somewhat or much more likely to start a plan if there were increased business tax credits for doing so. Increased employee demand came in as a third cited reason. Conversely, majority said that the availability of easy-to-understand information, tax advantages for key employees, or reduced administrative requirements would make them no more likely to offer a plan. So that's sort of a quick sketch of our research. What I'd like to do now is sort of turn to our panel, who've been very patiently waiting. So I'm going to be asking each of them a question, and the other panelists will have a chance to sort of chime in on that question, and I'll sort of go through the different folks. I'm going to pause and see if there are questions from the audience, because I do want folks here to have a chance to join the conversation. So, start thinking about a question. We have microphones that'll come around so that people on the web will be able to hear you. But let me start off, Alan, asking you the first question. You have a lot of experience with small business, and you've been observing the field for quite some time. Can you just describe what are the barriers for employers, going back over time, and how does that compare to today for trying to offer a retirement plan or sponsoring a plan? Has anything really changed, or what's new?
Yeah, great. Good morning. Glad to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Before I answer that question, I was just curious. I was looking at the audience and kind of a testing here, like informal. How many of you all are participating in a 401k plan? All right, so everyone raised their hands, so you're not in trouble, right? So it's good you're here, right? So, and that's always, I think, a barometer too in terms of it, and we understand it. And I think from my perspective, being when I was in the corporate side and working in the financial services arena, one of the things that's very interesting, and I was looking back and thinking about this, was that back then, in terms of retention, in terms of or attracting new employees, the notion, and specifically I had the West Coast region, so California, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and Oregon and Washington State, so primarily those key areas. In terms of penetrating and getting into the market, in emerging markets area, right? So Hispanic-owned businesses, African-American, Asian, and LGBT as well. And one of the things was back then was it was healthcare, right? Healthcare was the number one. That was number one in terms of retention. Hey, I have a better healthcare plan. This is the one that it's offered to you as an employee and so forth, and not so much on the 401k or retirement field overall, right? So it was one of those challenges. And for me, I was coming from managed care and healthcare for many years with Aetna as well, and I transferred over into the financial services area. So I saw that as back then the number one thing is if the a small business owner is wearing a lot of different hats, and he or she is looking how to keep their employees because it costs a lot to bring on new employees, and so there was that fact. I think fast forwarding now, healthcare is kind of already it's part of your benefits package to a certain degree. I'm not going to get into the recent overall ACA and what's good and what's bad, but I think that's always now a part of the package, right? Where now then employers are now looking at additional tools in the 401k and other avenues to be able to address and offer to them that aspect. So I see that as part of it now. Back then it wasn't, and now, so certainly now, in terms of your studies and others, as we know, in terms of the cost, that's the other part, back then that was always a barrier, and I think that doesn't change as well too now with other factors involved for small business and managing and juggling their business.
Holly or Rhett, do you want to chime in on that question before I give you a specific one, or any thoughts about what's changed over time?
Well, for one of the areas that we've looked at, I've heard from many of our members over the last 13 years that I've been at NFIB. We represent about 300,000 small business owners, mostly employers. And looking at the changes in compensation packages, generally speaking, we've seen a huge decline in the percent of owners offering health insurance. And so having a compensation package that is available to attract and retain employees, which is becoming increasingly more difficult with the tightening of the labor market and all of these areas, I feel maybe there's room and an opportunity for small business owners to offer a retirement benefit. Everything seems to be going kind of the way of defined contribution even with health insurance, if they're allowed going forward without being penalized. And going that way with retirement with 401k offerings, I see huge opportunities in that area. As I said, especially with the staggering decline, I think it's about 15 percentage points in the last 12 years of the smallest employers offering health insurance. It was in the 40s, and now we're in the 20s. And so they still need a way to help retain and recruit employees, and this is a good opportunity. One of the other avenues that I think is important is the percent of small employers that use payroll services. So about 30% of small employers use payroll services. If they use a payroll service, they're far more likely to offer benefits because they have resources that help them. But to John's point, they have to be stable. They have to feel that they can continue offering these benefits to even start the conversation with their employees of whether this is a good direction for their business. But payroll and the decline in health insurance, it's a ever-changing mixture of how they're developing their compensation packages and their ability to offer different types of compensation packages for their employees.
I think the only thing I'd like to add, I'd like to come back and talk a little bit about sort of the vastness of the small business universe when we talk about small business, because I think it's really important that we segment the industry. But on this specific piece, I think, what I hear when I talk to a lot of small employers is really the relationship between the employer and the employee is changing in a new way, especially when we talk about millennial employees. And so I think, decades ago when we thought about benefits, a lot of times employees would say, the boss has made a decision and, I've kind of trusted them and it's sort of the right thing and, they're doing everything they can. I think what I hear from a lot of small employers, particularly around those who are hiring millennials, is millennials want to be much more engaged in the decision-making process. They also want to know much more about what employers are offering. And so they are coming to their employers in kind of a new way and saying, how's our benefits package structured? I'm really interested in, X or retirement. And I think it includes a whole slew of benefits, not just retirement. But I think that new level of engagement from the employee is interesting and driving a different conversation that maybe we weren't seeing a few decades ago in terms of how employers think about their benefits offerings.
Do you think technology is part of that too? That, I'm going to show my age, that, when I wanted to learn about benefits or, mutual funds, I had to get a book from Consumer Reports, a little cumbersome way to find out about that.
Yeah.
But I think today it's much easier to get that information, do your due diligence.
Yeah, I think, particularly millennial employees just think about the world of benefits different with the tools and resources, that they have available to them. And I think, I think the one thing we can't ignore is we don't obviously need to get into a debate about the Affordable Care Act, but it's changed the delivery mechanism. We've gone from a business-to-business sort of marketplace to maybe even more of a business-to-consumer marketplace where the consumer has much more options. And I think that will create and is creating sort of a change in the way that we think about how the structure of benefits is offering, and I think particularly with younger employees.
Holly, I wanted to ask you, much as I like to think that Pew is the last word on everything whenever we do research, but I know you've been doing research for a long time at NFIB and both external to your membership as well as internal surveys of your membership. And so I really wanted to get your thoughts about, I've identified some barriers from our survey, but what do you hear either anecdotally or from your research, from your membership or other sources about just are there other barriers that I didn't mention or things that you would highlight from your work?
I think one of the areas that we've found in talking to our members when they're thinking through what a compensation package looks like is, well, as you mentioned, the complexity often of offering a retirement benefit. And especially for those firms who have high turnovers or lower wage industries where they're talking with their employees, or they are assuming that they're employees, it could be a mixture of both, that they want more in their paycheck. They want more in their paycheck. That's their focus in hiring and attracting employees or candidates to fill open positions. And so that's the main driver is, more in disposable income. So there's a lot of kind of internal differences between small business owners. As Red said, they are vast and diverse, and their employee compensations are the same. Whether they're they are hiring, temporary workers, high turnover rates, seasonal. Seasonal is huge. So if it becomes more complex in offering a retirement benefit, if you have seasonal employees in having a lot of paperwork or having a lot of hoops to jump through in the beginning and end of offering a retirement benefit, that's always going to be a problem for small business owners in the time that it takes to maintain that benefit for their employees.
I was going to add to that, and you know how Rhett was talking about millennials. That's the positive side in terms of the ability of wanting to know more and get more information and the access of it too. But if you go one step further down, then in terms of the barriers, especially small businesses, is the demographics in their base, right? So if you tend to have more in an Hispanic workforce or emerging market workforce, there's that other additional challenge in terms of culture, right? Culture change in that aspect. And you have, where, my dad now, he's retired, but, I was drilling him way back then, start and be part of the 401k and do it. But there's always this notion, especially in the Hispanic community, for example, is like, why am I going to save? I want to live day by day, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be here tomorrow, so that doesn't makes me no good. I want to use all the money I can now, right? But you try to, educate them and get them, and so that's always another challenge too, because the participation rate within your workforce as a small business owner, and the year end, you don't pass all the testing, and then what happens, right? You got to look at what are the avenues to pass testing, and sometimes the small business owner, it comes back to you and says, well, now I have to do this, or now I have to do this compliance, or return money back to employees, or the higher cost, higher executives. It becomes then a dysfunctional, right? Because they're like, what's the benefit if I'm putting all this time and effort as a small business owner, I'm wearing a lot of different hats, and then that year end, we're not doing well. My response to that when I was doing that in terms of account manager and sales and so forth was, look, you got to dedicate time to it, right? We need to have an opportunity to take them off the lines to be able to educate them. It's not going to happen overnight, but once every 6 months, we bring a team out here, get them to understand, or someone that has already participated, use them as an example, because it's very hard to crack that. The other part, last thing I was going to say, is in terms of the Hispanic community too, is some don't even have checking accounts, and we see it as a norm, right? They don't even have checking accounts, right? So there's that challenge as well too, of wanting money right away, instantly, and not in the institutions coming from countries that you can't depend or trust the government too. So there's all those different barriers too for the small business owner providing a great benefit tool, but then also making sure that it's running smoothly and moving forward and growing too in that aspect. So that part I wanted to interject as well.
Well, I think that's a great point. One thing I didn't mention from our research is that, we asked people, business owners, their familiarity with different kinds of retirement plans. A lot of people have heard about the 401k, and that did come out in the survey, but programs that are more geared towards small business owners, like simple plans, SEPs, the now defunct MyRA, but nobody really had heard about those. And so I think this idea of engagement that's continuous, how does the plan work, what's appropriate for your business, and then that follow-up and understanding testing and sort of those gruesome details. Never a fun topic to go through, but yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think we should also think about the small employer also as a vehicle. And so I think when we think about the small employer a lot, we're often thinking about what works for the small business. And as a small business advocate, I'm a huge fan of that. But we also have to recognize that there are going to be small businesses who can't offer plans but might be able to be a vehicle to their employees. And so I think some of the state-based solutions that we're seeing, for example, in Oregon and in California and other places, I've seen really successful models where the employer almost serves as the convener, because so yesterday I was chatting with a mutual friend of all of ours, Christy Arslan. Some of you may know her. She runs a small business, the Pop Republic popcorn truck that drives around DC, and she said something like really interesting to me. She was like, she has, I think they have 3 stores in the Virginia area. She was talking about sort of all of the things that they do for their employees, and she said it's so much more than a paycheck. We help some of them find housing. We help some of them do these things. They've really become this sort of role of convener, and I think as we think about the public policy challenges we have with the small employer community, there are ways that small employers can really help their employees get access to certain benefits. And so I think the small employer, in addition to thinking about policy that's smart for them, we also have to think about policy that's smart for their employees and how they can potentially be an avenue to reaching their employees, because we know really it's people who work for small employers who are in that coverage gap as we think about retirement.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, that's an excellent point. But I want to get back to a prior point that you raised previously. And, we keep using the word small employer or small business. And, that encompasses a lot of, enterprises and firms and whatnot. So, and I was excited to have you on the panel, Rhett, to sort of maybe provide some perspective on, what do we mean by, how many are actually small, micro enterprises? Can you just maybe talk a little bit about the differences and how that might impact, some of these questions about barriers to retirement?
I'm going to ask Alan to keep me honest since he's at the SBA. I mean, look, the data is really different, and I think that's if those of us who are small business policy dorks, we often joke around like, the biggest question in Washington is what is a small business? And if you look across federal and state legislation, I mean, it's completely different. So under the Affordable Care Act, we use 50 full-time employees and under, but for small business contracting, they use the upwards of 500 employees. I think you're amazing if you have 500 employees. To me, you're definitely not a small business anymore, right? You're quite frankly, you're a very large business. And so I think as we think about tools and public policy solutions and even private market innovations, we really have to understand the constituency that we're trying to craft the solutions for. And so, the best data I've seen is, we used to say it was 28 million. I think we're using the number 30 million now, small employers. But it's important to remember that the vast majority of those, between 22 and 23 million, they're self-employed individuals. And so the vast majority of them are actually not employing people. They may be hiring contractors throughout the year or doing a lot of subcontracts, independent contractors, things like that. But the vast majority of them are not employing folks. So really, when we talk about the small employer option, we're really talking somewhere between 6 and 8 million folks who are actually employing people. I think that's a really important perspective. And really, the vast majority of those are actually under 50. And so as we think about creating solutions, we really have to think about that market. We're talking about really small firms as they're dealing with sort of the complexity of it.
I want to ask if Alan or Holly have anything they want to add to that question. But I would ask if you have a question in the audience, could you raise your hand, and that way we can get the microphones to you and we can turn right to you as soon as we're sort of done with this line of questioning. But, Holly or Alan, this notion of what is a small business, I mean, do you see it either from your membership data or from your interactions at SBA or before? Do you have a sense of how different perspectives or definitions of what is small, how that affects barriers to retirement or even solutions?
First of all, Rhett did pass the test, so he's okay.
Okay, good. He can stay.
He can stay, yeah. So he's good. I was going to say, and as Rhett mentioned, the definition is 500 or less, and you think about that's a big business. That's thriving. So it all depends on the industry standards of that aspect. But one also thing in terms of what was mentioned too is that you look at the self-employed and the one or two shop kind of entrepreneur, but let's say they end up growing and they're expanding and they continue to grow, right? That one thing too that becomes still sometimes stuck in their mind is that they're not small anymore, right? So they think of that dream, that desire of entrepreneurship and their business growing and going to the next level, and now they have 10 employees, 20 employees. And I saw a lot of times where they forgot that now they're growing and becoming even more and looking at the benefits and what are the things that can be as incorporated, as you mentioned, in that sense. So that's the other part of it too, as well as I ran into that a lot in prior as well, is like, you're not a mom and pop that started with an idea and you're still that. You're now 100 employees. You need to have different vehicles. You need to look at different areas of doing, from payroll services, from retirement. So that's another thing I would say in terms of small business. There's that drive, that internal, entrepreneurs should take that risk and reward. But it's interesting, fascinating too, that risk and reward sometimes doesn't go over to what we're talking about today in that aspect.
Just to add on, I think one of the other interesting components is, with retirement benefits and also health insurance, is if they offer, the owner most generally participates in the plan also. So if they offer a 401k or any other type of retirement plan, the owner is also a participant. And so that's also a key factor, because for a lot of business owners, it's looking at their employees' retirement, health savings, all that. But it's also looking at, the products that they're interested in also, because, those are the same vehicles that they're using for their retirement. It was interesting, my sister just moved to DC, and the firm that she works for, I think they're around 6 years old, and they offer health insurance, and their story is so similar to what we've all been talking about. They offer health insurance to help recruit and retain employees. And just last month, the president of the firm asked her, so what do you think about whether we should offer bonuses or a retirement package or a retirement benefit? And so there are competing benefits available out there. And she said, well, bonus would be great. I'd spend that all tomorrow. The retirement package, I think, is probably a better tool for me in the long run. So yeah, I support the 401k benefit versus a bonus. But there's so many ways of an employer talking to their employees and offering up, kind of a menu of options to see where, they would best want their compensation package to look like. But it was interesting that health insurance was the first one, and then retirement was after the firm was more established and growing and becoming more financially stable, that was the next offer.
Yeah. Do we have some questions? We have a couple in the back. Please use the mic, and can you just identify yourself and then ask the question?
Hi, I came in a little late. I don't know if you touched this. I'm Mindy Reiser. I'm a sociologist. I've evaluated community economic development programs, some of which involve small business in the U.S. and overseas. I'd like to ask about the older worker now and how he or she fits into this retirement possibility universe. In terms of options, in terms of whether they already have a 401k, some may not. What kind of tailorings could employers do to this population? We know people are working longer. Some of them are well compensated and this is their dream career. Others are not. They're just trying to get by. So talk a little bit about this population segment.
Yeah, so question about the older worker, a perspective on the older worker and how we might think about them in particular. I would say it's actually a very pertinent question given the wave of the baby boom moving through to retirement. And we do have some evidence that programs like the ACA and others might be encouraging people to move from a career with an employer to self-employment, what we've been talking a little bit about, as sort of a bridge career to full retirement, or even phased retirement at a career employer. So any thoughts or perspectives on the older worker jump ball?
All at once. I would say from SBA's perspective, certainly that is a new wave, right? A transformation on that sense, that looking at from those that either go into retirement or want to start a small business, right? Because they're either in retirement or want to branch out. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, thinking outside the box. So what are the areas that SBA needs to look at in terms of not only the young entrepreneur per se anymore, or or middle age, but also older community as well in that sense. So we're looking at all that in that aspect of in terms of how is it more from a virtual perspective of reaching out across the country, or through our different district offices, which we have 68 across the country. So that's kind of on our radar.
The only thing I would add is that I can't remember the exact statistic, but I believe it's above 80% of small business owners actually are above the age of 50. And it really is sort of in that stage where you've had like one or two jobs and you decide, you've kind of decided like, I'm tired of working for the man or the woman and I'm going to go out and do my own thing. And, we see a lot of small employers actually, folks who start small businesses, right, dip into their retirement from potentially what was a good job to, put forward the capital to start their businesses. So I think it's a really interesting concept you raise. It's less on the worker side, but I think what we're seeing, folks, we did see under the Affordable Care Act a huge surge of people in the 50-plus community who, because they felt like they were in what we called job lock at the time, that they couldn't get health care elsewhere, that now that they were able to get so on the exchange, they did, step forward and, decide to start small businesses because of that. They felt like they weren't going to be discriminated against given their age, given the new rules. And so I think, it could be an interesting model to think about, because I would assume that someone who's in that age range, when they're thinking about starting a business, they probably think first, A, where am I going to get my health care if I go out and do this? And then B, what does this mean for my retirement? And so I think it's definitely something we should be thinking through.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting question too. I just, reflecting on it, there's sort of the pull of a new career and the opportunity you might be getting through, first was Part D and then the ACA, reduced healthcare costs, but I think it does raise the question of, well, there's also the issue of job loss. We do see people at the older ages losing jobs, and so they're getting pushed into sort of self-employment as well, involuntary. But then there's also the issue of, and this is more generally for the self-employed, what's the technological platform for encouraging them to save? That's one of the great things about working at an employer is you have an HR system, payroll deduction is extremely easy, you don't have to think about it. How do we reach older or younger, what I call contingent workers, self-employeds? That is a big question. So I'm sorry, Holly. Were you
No. We haven't looked specifically in our surveys of the age range of their employees and whether they offer, but we have seen that those firms who hire or employ a higher percentage of young employees are less likely to offer retirement benefits. So if they're more established, employ older, over 40 versus, having most of your employees be 20-somes, they're more likely to offer retirement benefits, probably because they're more established, but also it certainly could be that that is what they think their employees are looking for as a compensation package.
was there another question? I saw, there we go.
Good morning. I'm Jim Gatz with the Treasury Department, and it's good to be here and good to see you all today. I just had a question about the millennial issue we were talking about. It occurred to me, kind of we're talking about it in terms of the demand for benefits at work, but millennials are 35 years old these days, some of them, probably owning businesses. I just wonder, is there any research about that segment of the business owners in terms of openness, or it may be, I was just thinking that perhaps that sort of like a longer term strategy around policy would be focusing on businesses that are going to be bigger businesses in the next decade or so that are managed by people who are enlightened millennials. So just curious if you've done any research on that or any thoughts about that.
Well, for that demographic, the millennials, the 30 to, I can't remember what age demographic, but they would be the younger business owners, so they would just be starting out. There aren't very many in that population. They're generally, as Rod said, about 50 and over. That's where you're getting most of age demographic of a small business owner. So they're just by nature going to be newer, starting out, therefore less likely to offer more broad compensation packages until they become more established businesses. So that's always going to be a demographic challenge with newer businesses.
If that premise is correct with this generation.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I haven't seen any research out there on it. I know some of you are familiar with Carmen Rojas, who runs a group called the Workers Lab out of San Francisco. They've been doing some interesting work with bringing young CEOs under the age of 35 together to have conversations around, what are the structures we should be putting in place between the employer and the employee. So it'd be interesting to sort of dive into that and see kind of what they're hearing. But I think, the work is being done under the premise that these young folks who do start companies, who are hopefully going to be much larger companies, and I think in Silicon Valley we see some of that. And sometimes we focus on that. I do think it's happening in other parts of the country. Is interesting in terms of how do we start having these conversations with them early on in their lives and in their careers, so that as they sort of grow, they're thinking about how to make more of a connection between sort of robust benefits and bringing their workers' wealth along with the business's wealth at the same time.
Do we have another question? Can we get a microphone over there?
Jules Lichtenstein, formerly with the U.S. Small Business Administration Office of Advocacy and AARP. I just had a question. regarding the issue of wealth, and something that hasn't been discussed, especially in terms of small business owners, in terms of their business, the amount of business equity they have of their total wealth. And I believe that's a factor in terms of whether business owners are going to actually invest in their own 401k or IRA, and whether in fact they'll make it available to their workers. So I think the issue of wealth in general is an important one here, because your retirement account is one aspect of your wealth. But many business owners look at their business equity as their retirement. And if they're successful, they want to be able to cash in at the end, which isn't always easy, obviously, but it is an option, and is something that should be addressed in terms of looking at small businesses in general and their workers.
So the interaction between wealth, whether in a 401k or in business equity, how do you all see that playing out?
We produced a study or a survey in 2005, and we're redoing it, and hopefully it'll be released by the end of the year, asking those questions about the owner's retirement and how much of their retirement they think will be they'll have through equity in their business, through their 401k, through inheritance, through any other measure, pensions from a previous job. Interestingly enough, about 15 years ago when we produced this survey, they said that about some of their retirement would be through the equity of through their business. So most weren't banking on that being a significant part of their retirement. Certainly those higher profit businesses are going to offer 401k packages to their employees and also participate in the program themselves. And those that are lower profit businesses won't. And but it seems that in all the different categories for an owner in their retirement savings personally, they're getting it from a lot of different buckets. And so for all the categories that we offer them, it's always some of their retirement's coming from a whole litany of different things. But for those that are larger, more profitable, more is coming from their 401k retirement or whatever type of retirement program that they have in their business that they offer.
I was just going to add, I mean, this really gets back to sort of understanding our audience and what kind of business you're talking about, because, you know, as we're having the current conversation about the tax debate right now, there's a big question about, you know, pass-through entities, right, and how your business is set up. And so a lot of small employers are set up as LLCs, and so a lot of their money is, you know, they don't necessarily keep money in their business bank account or reinvesting in their business. It's flowing through their individual income. That doesn't mean that they're not saving it, but as they think about sort of, you know, where their cash and capital is stored, it really is about how their business is set up. It would be a completely different structure if you're set up, you know, as an S corp. And so the business structure and kind of the size of business and the diversity of the business we're talking about, whether it's a high-tech startup firm who employs 12 people who can offer a robust package versus the, you know, popcorn shop on the street. So that's kind of where I see the diversity in terms of this.
Alan, I wanted to ask you, and this might be a good segue to this, you know, helping small business owners think through a lot of these issues. You know, I know in your office, you oversee a lot of, you know, these entrepreneurial endeavors, and you know, the SBA, your office provides a lot of tools for the entrepreneur to either start or grow their business after they've started it. So, you know, thinking about some of these issues that have been raised, I mean, what sort of resources do you think are, you know, that your office offers that's really important in addressing these?
No, certainly. There's quite a bit of resources. You know, I refer it lately. I've been saying that, you know, everyone commutes. You know, some that drive to work, right? So you got your standard lanes, right? You got what I say the three main lanes that we have within entrepreneur development is you have SCORE chapters, which is 3,000 volunteers, and these are executive individuals, retired executives. However, that's changing as well for that segment of ours and that state resource partner of ours, because not only the target market is volunteers that have already retired from their industries, but those that are still in the industry too. So we're also looking at from that standpoint, and they're available 3,000 strong across the country to provide guidance and direction for an entrepreneur or small business. We also have small business development centers that are across the country as well. Those are 1,000 strong across the country, provide services, training, counseling as well. And then we have women business centers as well, over 100 plus, that not only just for women, but primarily focusing on the women entrepreneur and helping them on the counseling, the access to capital and so forth. So I would say those are the three main lanes that we have. But we also have, in terms from the virtual perspective too, right, that we're going to continue to expand and grow and really take it to the next level is the SBA's Learning Center. And what we mean by that is that sometimes individuals might not have easy access to a district office or one of our resource partners. So we're going to continue to expand and grow courses that will be available online for those individuals in the rural communities as well.
Great, and Holly or Rhett, I mean, I know, Rhett, you do campaigns around with the really small business owners, and Holly, you know, I don't know if you want to mention any tools that your organizations provide or that may augment what SBA is doing.
We have a number of resources. I also wanted to give a big shout out to SCORE, big fan of that program. We suggest to many of our members to go to ask their local SCORE chapter for help in all the various resources that they offer in business operations. But we also have affinity programs with different companies to help them access tools to help run their business, and also resources, online guides in all the various areas through marketing and benefits and compensation, and you know, all that we try to offer all the tools that we hear the most questions about in our members' business operations.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
My name is Carl Pulzer, and I have a project called the Center on Capital and Social Equity. I just wondered, I heard a lot of reasons why a business might not want to do a pension plan, and not a whole lot of reasons why it might want to. But at the top of, assuming that the business community is kind of Darwinian, you know, there are the strong and there are the weak. If you were to construct an incentive, government incentive, either financial or otherwise, to give to the business owner or individual proprietor, why wouldn't it create a bigger coverage gap? Because wouldn't the people predisposed to offering pensions take it? And wouldn't it not be big enough to help the people at the very bottom? Or would it?
So, you know, the question is some sort of public policy intervention. Wouldn't that just already help those that need it least, is maybe another way to put it. So maybe thinking about, you know, how do we help those that need help the most? So
I think one of the ways, I mean, unfortunately, there's so many competing factors in operating a business that consume the owner's time through increased regulations and all other areas of business operations that constrict their available time to then offer a retirement benefit plan that they initially feel is complicated and complex and time-consuming to implement anyway. So lowering the barrier to entry for offering these plans, I think, is the first step in all of this. And the easier it is, the more they'll be able to do it. I think the increase in business owners who use payroll services, where payroll services, the expense of implementing a payroll service is declining. So if they're able to go that route, it's easier for them to implement some of these more technical benefit programs. So I think those are areas that can help. You know, Congress talking about Rothifications of retirement benefits, it's not helpful. It scares everybody. In their ability to offer attractive products to their employees. So lowering the bar of entry or the barriers of entry, I think is the number one focus.
You know, I would just, I'll let you guys chime in too, but just to underscore what Holly said, when we did focus groups with business owners around the country before we did our survey, we talked about different policy ideas. I know we have another panel that'll get into this in more detail, but whether it's MEPs or auto IRAs, to Holly's point, a lot of business owners told us, they said, I can't do this on my own right now. I want to do it, but I can't do it. And I'm competing against firms that do have 401ks. So anything that might give me, a little bit of a leg up would be super helpful. But so it's really thinking about those barriers to entry that Holly talked about.
And that's what I was going to say. So this panel was set up to talk about the barriers, and the next one's going to wow you on the solutions. But I think set the bar high. But I think it gets back to creating the right public policy solution. And so the question is, there's lots of proposed solutions on the table. There's the auto IRA, and the opt-out method, which in cases where we've seen it potentially be very effective. There's also a conversation about tax credits, right, and whether a tax credit could be effective. But can you structure the tax credit in a way that it's not just folks who are in the know or folks who can get access to it, but it really helps the folks who are struggling to try to find the coverage, and that is the big question. And then there's a broader question about requirement. And so I think as we move forward, first I'd like to applaud a lot of people in the private sector, because I think there's a lot of innovative things going on to bring small employers to the table on this, and I definitely think there are market and private sector solutions that we need to explore. I also think as we think about the public policy solutions, it really gets back to the point I was trying to make earlier, which is really focusing on the right size of business to make sure that the public policy solution that we're creating really benefits them and not necessarily businesses who are already able to offer these sort of benefits.
Since we're starting to push open the door on solutions, we should probably sort of wrap up, but let's have one more question, and then we'll go to the next panel.
Okay, thank you. Alan, you mentioned some of the attitudes and cultural issues within your community as far as resistance to or knowledge about retirement plans, within small businesses in that community. And my name is David Greer, and I work in wealth management and financial advisory at Merrill Lynch, and we find these types of things across all groups, generations, ethnicities, and so forth. And so I'm just wondering, to the panel in general, of course, people, they have fear, they have concern, of course, it's an issue of time, resources. So any ideas as to how we can better educate, people are looking for sort of unbiased opinions on what to do. They don't want to be necessarily sold on a particular plan, a particular package. So in terms of education, better populating the people, how do we, your ideas on how we accomplish that?
Great question.
I go back to a little bit back then, and I think it's still prevalent now, and 24/7, 7 days a week as a small business owner, juggling and bottom line, and now it used to be benefits package. Now it's like, what kind of social media platform do I have? How am I comparing and fighting against or competing against other competitors and so forth? But I think also the commitment, right? The commitment of the financial institutions that are providing those tools and services, right? That it's not, I always say, not a drive-through approach, right? So it's not like, hey, we really want to be in your community. These are the vehicles. Business owners, you got to use our product. This is going to be great. We have it all nice and glossy. We have it online. We have it everything. And then a year or two later, it goes away. And then so you get that mistrust again. You get that like, why should I? Even though maybe the business owner still has the plan, but you have those challenges. So I say part of it is the commitment and understanding it, right? Having the right, representation to target those particular communities that are for that business owner or that small business owner, so they can relate as well and have that trust factor.
I think we're at an interesting time, right? Because we're at a time where trust in a lot of institutions is low, and so the question is, do we trust the information the government gives us? Do we trust the information on that? The one thing that I've seen has been the most interesting source of information for small business owners, and I think some of you know I used to run a small employer organization. It's small employers when they talk to each other, right? Those are the people they trust. hey, I've got a good accountant, I have a good advisor, can you recommend someone? And so I think, as we think about working with small employers, part of it is bringing them early into the process. Some of us were in Oregon recently for an event around Oregon Saves, and I was really impressed with the small employers around the table and how early the employers have been involved in the process and the feedback they're getting from the small employers. But then when you listen to the small employers talk to each other as a sort of a trusted resource, there's no one who can really be in a small business's shoes other than a small business owner. And you can do lots of things, telebriefings, conference calls, different sorts of trusted messengers, but the people they trust the most are each other. And so I think figuring out how to link that up will be key to our education and outreach effort as we propose solutions on this.
It reminded me of something from our focus groups. We asked business owners where they got information about plans, how to start a plan, and someone said Facebook. And we're in the observation room, we started to laugh, but they made the point that Facebook is their friends, and that's who they go to because they trust them. Very much to your point, Rhett. So I think that's it for our time. So I want to thank the panel and then turn it over to Jeremy Smith.
Thanks, John, and thanks to Alan and Holly and Rhett for a great panel and that teed us up really perfectly. I want to make two procedural notes, and I'm going to speak very briefly. The first one is there are seats up front, so please, if you're sitting in the back, come join us. And the second, I'm not quite sure how this message actually gets out. The webcast is not working, so I'm talking to some people who are not watching me at the moment, but we will be showing this afterwards. The recording will be available. So to you future viewers, we're really sorry about that, some serious technical difficulties. So we're going to shift gears, as John and Rhett and others said, to go from challenges to solutions. And I'd like to say that I basically have the easiest job of the whole day, which is to introduce people who basically don't need introductions. So that's always the best place to be. We're going to hear first from Tobias Reed, who's the state treasurer of Oregon. You have people's full bios, so I'm not going to go into that, but I will say that in the previous panel, especially that last question teed up, or one of the last questions teed up this whole, how do you find solutions that target businesses that have workers who need services most, right? Well, one of the most interesting models out there, by no means perfect, but one of the most interesting models is the work that Oregon and California and other states like Pennsylvania and Maryland and Connecticut and Illinois are thinking about is how do you do this in a way that puts very, very little burden on the small employers. So when we think about how to solve this challenge, one answer is public policy, and the other answer, as I think Rhett said really well, is all the innovation that's coming from the private sector. Not just fintech startups, although we will have some really great voices you'll hear about in our panel in a second, but also from mainline providers who are doing great, great work. And so when Tobias is through, we're going to hear from Jamie Calamarides, who's the president of Prudential Group Insurance. Jamie's been a tireless advocate for retirement savings broadly throughout his long career at Prudential. He's passionate about open MEPs and other ways to reach the people who are not within the current system. And so it's wonderful to have these two perspectives sort of both to share with you guys, but also to tee up more of the conversations as we get to the next panel. So without further ado, Tobias, please join us.
Well, thank you very much for letting me intrude on a good discussion. I especially want to thank Aspen and the Bipartisan Center and Pew and Prudential and everybody else who's making this possible. I'm here from the other end of the Oregon Trail with an update on some pioneering work that we're trying to do. And my hope in just a few minutes is to give you a very quick history of how we got here and intersperse that with some of the lessons that have become clear throughout our experience. So obviously I don't need to spend any time describing to this room why this is a big deal and why this is important. I have to do that a lot in Oregon, but this is a well-informed group, so I'm going to skip right past that. Oregon is not unlike the rest of the country in that respect. We have about 4 million in population. About 1 million people are working in Oregon and don't have access to any kind of retirement savings plan at work, and we think that's a big problem. So we started this work in 2013 when the Oregon legislature convened or created a task force to provide recommendations to the legislature on how to increase the number of people who are saving and increase the dollars that they're saving. They came back after a long process that included lots of people and lots of perspectives to the 2015 legislature and made a recommendation that the state establish an opt-out IRA program that would have professional management and an opportunity to pool resources, to have auto escalation, a number of other features, and be professionally managed. It's important that task force have a wide range of representation, and they came back to the legislature with those recommendations. This is a nice bit of symmetry for me because I was serving in the legislature at that point and got to be the chief sponsor of the legislation that ultimately passed, and now as state treasurer I get to help implement that. A rare thing to be able to follow that through the process, but it's been fun. The task force provided this opportunity. The legislature passed the legislation, and I think one of the real keys was the process we went through, having direct involvement from employers, from payroll providers has already been mentioned, and a diverse perspective from around the state. The other thing I think we did well, and this credit here goes to our friends in California and Illinois who passed legislation before we did. We learned from their experience and tried very hard to strike the right balance of answering the questions we knew would come up when we could, but also leaving the board that we created the room to ask and answer questions that we couldn't anticipate in the legislation. I'd give that as one of the keys for us. We have set up a way that allows people to have a pretty simple and easy experience, and we were intentional in doing that in 2 pilot phases before we have sort of full rollout. Now we have, in the form of 2 pilots, just over 1,000 people participating, and since July when that started, those people have collectively saved a little over $170,000. That's averaging about $60 per pay period. So we feel like we're on the path. And in January, we will start rolling this out to the larger employers first. Every few months we'll go down that spectrum. So in January, this will become live for employers in Oregon who have more than 100 employees and who do not offer another retirement plan option. So that kind of gets you up to the current, and I want to share just a few quick lessons in kind of 2 categories. One, the effect, and 2, some policy implications for those of you who are thinking about these. One is really important that small businesses want this. My friends in Oregon are tired of hearing me tell the story about the sandwich shop in the district that I used to represent in the legislature. You probably all have this kind of an institution in your communities, the place where everybody goes. It's the iconic small business where the proprietor has been doing it for a long time and knows everybody in the community. Everybody knows him. It's Cheers with sandwiches. And this guy, Chuck Wilson, says it really well. He said, I want to do this for my employees, but I don't have an HR department. I got sandwiches to make. And so we've heard that experience around Oregon. We've heard it, as has already been mentioned, as a source of competitive parity to give people the chance to offer this benefit. But I think it's important to remember the altruistic nature too, that employees or employers want to do this for their employees. The second is the effect that it's having on the financial service marketplace as well. We've had a number of instances where employers report that they were thinking about this. They had wanted to do this, but our program is sort of giving them the nudge to actually get it done. And if nothing else, financial service providers now have the platform to go to employers and say, you have to do something. We can offer you another plan. And from our perspective, that's a perfectly fine outcome. To have more people with access to retirement savings plans are a very good thing. Now, as regards policy, we have more things to do. We worked really hard to make sure that we were minimizing the impact on employers. But we are now facing a lawsuit by some employers who, while they say that they support the goals of the program, they don't believe that we should be able to require any steps for them to register. We've set up a plan that would ask them to say, we offer another plan, and then they would be exempt. The process takes between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. That lawsuit is ongoing, so that's a note of caution. The other is to make sure we have some real pressure to make sure that we're moving as quickly as possible to financial self-sufficiency. We were really clear with the legislature that this is not going to be a cost to taxpayers over time. We're using general fund supported loans to get started, but we're obviously facing pressure from the legislature to get on a path to repaying those loans as quickly as possible. And I think in that respect, those of you who are considering these sorts of plans have to keep that in mind as you work with your partners and providers. Seek out those partners who understand the mission and the legal constraints. A lot of forces that are seeking to limit the effectiveness and expansion of these kinds of approaches. And that requires a lot of flexibility, a lot of trust and collaboration between all the people that are involved. So I would say it's really important to not get high-centered and to be willing to address the challenges that come up and not get stuck on what might have been the case 12 or 18 months in the past. In that respect, it's also important to remember how quickly the landscape can change. And we, of course, were very happy about the Labor Department rule that clarified the effect that ERISA would have on these state-based programs. Disappointed that the Congress elected to rescind that, but we still believe we are well within the safe harbor of the original ERISA legislation. But that's another example of where flexibility and adaptability can be really important. It might have been naive, I will confess, of me to think that focusing on making it easier for people to save for their retirement and take control of their own financial future would be a bipartisan issue. I confess to perhaps being a bit naive on that. But I don't think it makes it any less important. And I still struggle to understand why people would want to make it more difficult for people to do that. It's in all of our interests, and even if someone's only interest is in smaller government, I think this is a route to that by giving people a chance to accumulate their own assets and be less of a draw on our social safety nets. But I'm still hopeful. I think we're on a good path, and I definitely want to acknowledge our colleagues in California and Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland, all these other places. We're part of a community that I think is trying to take this on, and that includes all of you. So I am glad to be here, glad to be part of this discussion, and of course, I hope it need not be said that we are interested in Oregon and being helpful to anyone else who wants to take this on. I think we hopefully will all be back together on a regular basis, thanks to Aspen and Pew and BPC and Prudential and others to celebrate these things as they're on their way. So thank you very much for letting me be here. And to Jamie.
Good day. My name is Jamie Calamotes, and I'm from Prudential. I want to thank Treasurer Reed for those great remarks about describing what's happening at the state level, and for the first panel for describing the challenges and some of the opportunities in the research. Very grateful to Aspen and the Bipartisan Policy Center and for Pew for sponsoring this event. I'd like to talk about 5 items. First, why this even matters. Second, what the unmet needs of employers are. Third, what the opportunity and who's going to benefit from this. And then I want to narrow in on solutions at the federal level, knowing that the next panel is going to talk about technology and some of the state solutions. And then I want to discuss very briefly, if we're talking about coverage, what else should we be talking about for small business workers? I'm going to make some very simple statements. First, savings at the workplace matters. Why? Because work and wealth are inextricably connected. People earn their income at work. This sounds silly, but needs to be said. Not only that, wealth, and what I mean by wealth is when I refer to that asset building language of what's the balance sheet of individuals, wealth is accumulated through the workplace when there are benefits offered. When there is a retirement plan available, families have 15 to 16 times more wealth than those families who work at workplaces without retirement benefits. 15 to 16 times more wealth, assets. And 80% of CFOs agree that if their employees are financially secure, they will be more engaged at work and therefore be better workers. It makes sense that work and wealth are connected. So in many ways, while we're talking about policy and technology and local and federal solutions, we also need to call on employers to re-engage in the conversation of work and wealth. Now, the challenge is many small employers, and we've talked about this, are not experts in this. They are, in effect, consumers themselves. And small businesses, from our research, and it supports the research that others have said, don't offer retirement plans for 3 reasons. It costs too much relative to retail products. It is administratively a hassle, and they have a fiduciary responsibility. We have a law called ERISA that makes small business owners personally responsible. It pierces the veil of whatever legal entity they have, that if they do something wrong, all of their savings, all of their network, their house can be liable for what they do wrong in the process. And the GAO reports and many other reports support this. So who works at small businesses? There are 55 million Americans who work at small businesses. Small businesses are the fastest growing area for new jobs. Those 55 million small business workers, 30 million of them are women. 22 million of them are people of color. This is a public policy area for everyone to tackle. Of those 22 million people of color, 12 are Latino, 6 are African American, 4 are Asian American. 4 million are Asian American. So there are lots of solutions underway, and I want to applaud all the solutions because I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach matters. But I want to focus on 2 federal solutions and comment on them. First, I want to talk about the MyRA, and regardless of what your opinion is on it, and I want to thank Mark for his leadership on it in particular, there are some lessons that we can all learn from the progress of it. First lesson is simplicity matters. The MyRA had one investment. It was very simple for what the individual could invest in. Stability matters, especially for new investors. The MyRA offered guarantee of principal and interest, and I would suggest that that sort of offering is very helpful for new investors who are concerned about capital volatility that they can experience in equity markets early as they're saving and gaining confidence. Volatility really matters when you're young, but if you're scared and you're not sure that money's going to be there and you want it to be proven, stability matters. This third lesson is scale. Unfortunately, the MyRA did not get the chance to get to scale. Reports suggest with 20,000 users, it required almost $300 per person to be able to pay for that over the course of the year. And you could argue that it didn't have enough time to get to scale or that it was not an effective economic environment, but the lesson learned is that we need to get to scale. I think the fourth lesson is the flip side of that, and that is we have to have persistence. We have to allow the programs to grow. The savers had accumulated $500, which is better than 1/6 of the American population in terms of savings. So the MyRA, even though it only affected 20,000, got those people better than 1/6, the worst 1/6 of the U.S. population that does not have $500 saved. I think that the other piece is, another lesson is we have to continue to market. We have to think about user experience and changing people's behavior. We have to think about auto-enrollment capabilities, which the MyRA was not allowed to do because of the laws and the particular fast approach that it was taking using an IRA solution. And as Treasurer Reed had suggested, bipartisan solutions are more sustainable. This did not survive because of the partisan aspect of it, but bipartisan solutions are absolutely possible, and we'll talk about them. So now I want to flip and talk about open multiple employer plans. These are often called pooled employer plans as well. And we can make small changes to federal law that will have enormous benefits to small businesses and their workers by simply allowing small businesses to pool their purchasing power and act like a medium and large size business. Because guess where the 401ks and similar products are working? They're working in small, medium, and large businesses. People are saving. They're benefiting from automatic enrollment, automatic escalation. So multiple small employer plans would allow small businesses to pool their purchasing power. They can get scale in a commercial environment. They can do it with simplicity. The laws and the bills that are being considered remove the one bad apple rule that requires every individual right now to be jointly and severally liable. It keeps the fiduciary responsibility with professionals. It retains all the consumer protections of the 401k plans in ERISA. And if the bills that contain a model plan approach are passed, and the Department of Labor and Treasury write a model plan design for multiple employer plans, that'll create simplicity, it'll create standardization of plan design, and providers like Prudential and our worthy competitors will compete on service, price, and investment performance, not on plan design. Instead, there'll be best practices of plan design. Now, multiple employer plans are bipartisan. They're supported by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Key concepts are supported by AARP, by affinity groups, by the industry. And in today's somewhat crazy environment, they are a very bipartisan solution. They've gone through regular order in the Senate. A bill has been passed in the Senate Finance Committee last Congress, 26-0. That included multiple employer plans. We don't hear about regular order process on tax-related and retirement things, and so this is on the stages of developing. And just to emphasize this even more, multiple employer plans have been included in every bill related to coverage in Congress, in the 115th Congress, in the 114th Congress, and in the 113th Congress. Every bill related to retirement coverage, and there are many. There are sponsors of Buchanan and Neal and Hatch and Wyden and Collins and Nelson and Kind and Renacci and Harkin and Brown, and it keeps going on. This is a bipartisan idea. My last comment, coverage is not enough. If we're going to provide coverage to small business workers, they don't want to just accumulate assets, they want lifetime income. And it turns out that all of these bills also touch upon lifetime income. We should not settle for just coverage. We should also make sure that we're giving people the tools to generate lifetime income. And it turns out, and we were talking about it a little bit on the first panel, individuals are concerned about their future only if they also have control over their present day and over the unexpected bumps of managing risks in today and managing their student debt. And we have an opportunity to raise the dialogue around entirely financial wellness. Clearly, let's focus the rest of the conversation today on coverage, maybe bring in a little bit of income. But the challenges are definitely solvable. Now's the time to act from a public policy point of view so we can also enable the technology and the user experience. Thanks so much. Oh, and I'm supposed to introduce. And I'm supposed to introduce Ida in the next panel.
Thanks, James. So we can go ahead and invite the rest of the panel up for panel 2. No, oh, there's 5 of us. Yeah, go ahead. Is this the one I have to sit in for the mic? Okay, I'll sit on the edge.
Right, lots of great tweeting happening, and I keep trying to keep up with the conversation and my Twitter feed. And multitasking is never my strong suit, so. But I encourage you to continue to use Small Business Retire and get into conversations with each other in this work. And we'll get into a much deeper conversation about solutions as we go now. So I'm Ida Rademacher. I'm a vice president at the Aspen Institute and the director of the Financial Security Program here. And it's great to see such a full house on a very different take on the retirement coverage conversation than the one that we're seeing in Washington on a daily basis these days. And I want to thank everybody who's on this panel, and I'll introduce everybody in a second, but folks in the room for making time to think about pragmatic solutions to a really critical problem in U.S. policy and in people's everyday lives. One of the things that I love about just the timing of this event is that even as there is a tax policy, tax reform conversation going on that has very little to do with retirement, tax policy is usually the one place where we get to talk about retirement. It's the one place where it's a flashpoint. And this time around, it's not even that. We can't even really use that leverage point in a very productive way. Even the incredible conversations that are happening about whether the incentives stay or whether they go is less than the tip of the iceberg about what we really need to be grappling with as a country in terms of the level of insecurity, financial insecurity facing U.S. households going forward in this country. So the nice part is that at Aspen, we like to showcase leadership. We like to showcase people rolling up their sleeves and getting it done. And we love to collaborate with great partners like Pew and the Bipartisan Policy Center to do that as well. And most importantly, we love to be able to have an opportunity like this to bring in many of the leaders from the private sector and policy innovators and people that are on the ground working with consumers and small businesses every day to really help to put a broader set of context around how do we solve this problem. There are literally hundreds of industry providers finding pragmatic solutions and enrolling thousands and thousands of employers every day into retirement plans. There are back-end technology solutions that are advancing. There are policy innovations happening at the state level advancing. And we, I think, don't often enough go ahead and roll this up and say, what do we know that's different now than the kind of stale conversation we were having about coverage 10 years ago? We have a lot of different providers, a lot of different innovators in that space. And so this conversation is going to build on the earlier one and really get into some of the ecosystem of new solutions that are happening, both in terms of the market-making policy paradigms that are happening at the state level and the kinds of new technology platforms that are doing much of what Jamie said, simplifying, figuring out ways for stability, figuring out ways to think about the new kinds of intermediaries and platforms that can make this easier for workers. And also, I think, how that is actually connected, how the policy work and the industry work can actually create a lot of the solutions to the numbers. As David Mitchell wrote in the recap, when we did a small business retirement blog series earlier this year, which many of the folks in this room wrote pieces on, of the 55 million Americans that don't have coverage, 32 million of them work for small businesses. So this particular piece of coverage is a huge piece of it. And on the panel with me today are people who have really deep insights into how to think about specifically that marketplace and how to address it and serve it and solve these problems. So without further ado, I want to introduce, let me just try to go from the end here. We've got Bill Guillocheau, who's the president and CEO of Ascensus. And again, you've got full bios for everybody here. This is an amazing panel. I'm so excited. We had such a good conversation prepping for this panel that I got on the wrong train. And like literally on Friday, I was just talking and gesticulating wildly, and I got on the wrong train. And when I saw my train pass me, I was like, oh. I'm on that train. So that's how I know we're going to have a great conversation today. So to Bob's left is Jeff Rosenberger, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Guideline. And to his left is Paul Davidson, who's the Director of Human Resource Services at Paychex, and I think even more specifically, really kind of built out a lot of the retirement business line at Paychex. And then beside me is Katie Solinsky, who about 6 months ago, was appointed as the Executive Director of the California Secure Choice. So welcome. Thank you. Let's go ahead and get started with, after I teed that up maybe a little bit too verbosely, how you all see the work that you do as creating this kind of broader solution, how it contributes to this solution to the small business coverage gap. And Paul, we can start all the way down with Bob, with you, if you'd like.
Sure. So I think all that we're talking about today is critically important, and it is sort of smack dab in the middle of what Ascensus is all about as an organization. Our business is all about helping Americans save for some of life's most important things, whether it's their own retirement, their own health care, their children or grandchildren's college education, or for dependents with disabilities. We do that for 7 million Americans, and within the retirement market, We serve more than 50,000 U.S. employers who today are offering a qualified retirement plan to their employees. Germane to today's discussion, 80% of those plans are with employers that have 50 or fewer employees. So I think we have a pretty close view into what's going on in the small employer market. We were also fortunate enough to have been selected by both Oregon and Illinois as the program administrator for their, the Oregon Saves program and the Illinois Secure Choice program. And, I think that, as everyone knows all too well, the coverage issue is a very, very significant one. I think that the sort of the public-private partnership that exists with some of the state-sponsored programs, I think, is going to really spark a greater degree of coverage for sure. But as Treasurer Reed has mentioned, and in California and Illinois, I think all those states recognize that another great outcome of this will be that it sort of puts the issue front and center to small employers. You either have to enroll in the state-sponsored program or perhaps start your own, and Pew's research indicates that, half of the folks will start their own. And I think that will certainly go a long way towards kind of unlocking that small end of the employer market to being able to offer retirement benefits to their employees. On sort of a more positive note, though, just in the way the world exists today, if you looked at our business, and just in the month of October, we brought on 700 new employers' retirement plans. 35% of them were startups. We have seen a big uptick over the last few years in startup plans, which I think is obviously reflective of the fact that we're now, quite a few years of the Great Recession being in the rearview mirror. So I think, to John's earlier commentary, obviously as companies are around for a longer period of time, and ultimately when they begin to have, greater financial capabilities, a retirement plan is something that they offer. However, that still represents a very, very small percentage of employers and their employees that truly need coverage. And that's where I think that states have been very much out in front on this issue. And I think that sort of public-private partnership will provide a tremendous safety net for millions of American workers who have no coverage at all today.
Thanks. And Jeff, let me go to you because, you're coming to this work almost without consideration of what was happening with those state public-private partnerships, seeing the business opportunity and seeing ways that technology could drive some greater portion of the solution. So why don't you say a little bit about kind of what your work is in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Ida. At Guideline, we're a pretty new company, 2.5-year-old company, so we've come at this with a pretty clean sheet of paper. And we take the perspective of, to your point on the growth in the startup plan market, we are very focused, almost exclusively focused on the access problem and going after the startup market. So the vast majority of our clients, small business owners or small businesses, are very, very small businesses starting their very first plan.
When you say very small, we've had many definitions with Rhett today, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you can play around with the statistics a couple different ways, and it'll give you interesting sort of perspective on it. What I would say is we are focused on bringing that decision, to John's prior point in the prior panel, from a middle decision to an early decision, where it's like you get your payroll, and it may sound a little vulgar, but it's kind of like you get your payroll service, but would you like fries with that? Which is, can we get your 401k right there at that point? So, 5-person company starting up their very first plan is a great place.
Paul, you might want to put that into the Patriots marketing program.
I don't know if the marketing guys would go for that.
You guys will talk later. We'll figure this out.
Yeah, so we're just very focused on the access piece and getting people to make this decision. If historically they've made that decision, maybe 20 to 50 employees, and feeling like they've got a stable base to work off of, can we help bring that decision earlier into the evolution of the life of the company, where there may be 4, 5, 6 employees? And I think, to Holly's point earlier, I think a critical point into the credit of Paychex and what they've developed, I think having a payroll service is an underestimated piece of all this versus doing more manual-based payroll for these really small businesses. And part of our strategy, which I won't go into now, is to just focus on, can you tap into into payroll, we focus on working with more of the cloud-based, more newer sort of payroll companies with that in mind.
Great, and I think, in terms of the technology, and then we'll go to you, Paul. Your own decision to get into this, your personal decision to get into this, is part of it. So maybe you can just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've worked in consumer finance for about 10 years. I previously was at Wealthfront, one of the really innovative players in the kind of robo-advisor space, and going out and talking to a number of early companies, and we focused on a little more of the mass affluent market there, and in the early stages, a lot of tech employees and serving them. I heard a lot from small businesses, and particularly in that case, it was a lot of tech companies saying, gosh, it'd be great if you could get us a really great 401k plan at 5, 10, 15 employees. We're not seeing that in the market the way that we look out at it. And so it was sort of a personal experience and evolution to get there. I joined the founders as an advisor early on in the company and then joined full-time a little over a year ago.
Thanks. I mean, moving to you, Paul, the payroll piece of this was your starting point as well.
Sure.
But your numbers are impressive at this point. So why don't you say a little bit about kind of the role you're playing and the role you hope to play?
Sure. So Paychex grew up as a payroll company. Today we have about 600,000 companies using our payroll, which covers about 10 million people. When you look at the retirement plan, and Paychex has evolved offering a whole array of employee benefits. But when you look at that client base, we have, because we do the payroll, we have a view into what they're doing and see who has a retirement plan, who doesn't. And we're very proud of the fact that we have 80,000 plans in the books. I believe that's more than anybody else. The majority of them are brand new startup plans. Our average size is in the teens. But as proud as we are of all that, when you look at our 600,000 clients, 80,000 of them have a plan with us, 90,000 have a plan with somebody else, and the other 70% have no plan at all. Mm-hmm. So we feel like there's a great opportunity there, and we feel like all those folks deserve the opportunity to save for a good retirement.
Yeah, I mean, Katie, I'm going to ask you I'm going to jump into this with you in a different way, because, I think when you just read the numbers from all three of the businesses on the panel, it's a story of excitement. It's a story of growth, huge growth opportunity, and more firms earlier in their life cycle getting retirement there. But then you actually you zoom back out and you look at the metadata, and you still realize that it's, what was the statistic earlier? Somebody said 17%. I'm looking at David. What of small businesses? 14%. It went up 3% while we were talking. I mean, amazing. That it's still at scale an unsolved problem, even while there's opportunity in the marketplace. So there's a way that the states have envisioned needing to step in, a way that we all first envisioned a federal policy needing to step in some ways, to think about how do you actually close this gap or accelerate the closing of that gap. But say a little bit more, and I know that Treasurer Reed has spoken a little bit as well, but maybe say a little bit more from your perspective about what you see the job is in California and what the scale of the gap is that you might be able to address in California.
Sure, happy to do that, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's great to be here to hear about all the innovation happening in the private sector as well. But our leadership in California, starting with Senator Kevin De Leon and then Treasurer John Chung, created Secure Choice because they identified a big gap in coverage. And in California, there are 7.5 million people who work but do not have access to a retirement savings vehicle at work. And we know, based on all the good research that was already cited earlier, that people are 15 times more likely to be on a path to retirement security if they have a way to save via automatic payroll deduction at work. And there's something about the power of doing that at work that is powerful. So of those 7.5 million people, 2/3 work for small businesses, and 2/3 are people of color. And we'll get to outreach more later in the panel, I think. But our leadership identified that as an issue and decided to step in with an innovation. So I think one important point that I want to make today is that our state law that authorized Secure Choice first said small businesses in the state with 5 or more employees, you can comply with this new law by doing one of two things. Either go out onto the marketplace and find a plan just like you can today, or if you don't want to do that, provide access to Secure Choice. So, if the results of our state law were to be the market shifts and innovates and comes up with plans that are more appealing to employers, small businesses, and to employees. And if those employers choose to respond to our mandate by going with those plans, that's great. We would consider that a success. So I want to be really clear, and I think the treasurer said that in his remarks, that we measure our success based on increased coverage, increased access to savings. So Secure Choice will be figuring out a way to measure the broader improvement in access. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'd see it in some ways as you defining a new floor. Right?
Yep.
If the floor
Yep.
was nothing, the new floor is I have an automatic IRA. Employers can't contribute to it. So there's limitations in it, but at the same time, it is a starting point that is fundamentally different than nothing. And that the set of options, nothing gets taken off the table except the idea that people don't have any retirement savings and connections to thinking about that long-term savings.
That's right, and we do think change is incremental. So I try to be careful to say that we do not promote Secure Choice as the panacea to the retirement security crisis in this country or in California. It's an automatic IRA. The contribution limit is $5,500 a year, as you all know, and there's no employer match. So we think that it is a massive step forward, and it's opening up access to 7 million new people in California, hopefully. But if an employer wanted to choose a 401k with a higher contribution limit and a match,
and there
that'd
are
be
tax
great.
incentives to do it. And
Yeah.
I mean, it makes the entire. We talk in a lot of the other parts of the asset building field about the teachable moments. People getting a first job and getting their first paycheck is an excellent time to intervene and talk about getting banked, and things like that. Tax time is an excellent primed time when people are thinking about this. This kind of forces a crucible moment for employers to consider something that they may have not. And I would say that I'm channeling, even as we're up here, I'm mindful of everything Jamie just said and many others in the room about open reps, and Jim, as you as well. So I think another piece of this pie about addressing the issues at scale is what are the ways that you can aggregate the concerns and kind of mitigate some of the costs and the headaches for small businesses in ways that actually aren't represented on the panel but are in the room, and we'll have those conversations as well. But let me put a question to all of you. And it has a little bit to do with what Katie just said and a little bit to do with what's different about what you're doing now. So on the one hand, we know that there have been solutions out there for small businesses for a very long time. There's SEPs, there's Simples, there's many solutions that have been on the books of companies to serve small employers for a long time. And now there's a whole new wave of solutions that are really technology driven or keying off of the payroll system in that moment. So do we already have enough for the market to address the challenge? Or do we actually need this additional level of requirement as leverage to truly make a dent on providing a solution that hits at scale for workers and small businesses? So kind of this I don't want to call it a mandate. But it is a requirement issue. Do we need it to make this stuff work? Do you think technology can answer it? Is it actually stronger together? What are people's perspectives on this?
Well, look, mandate obviously is a tough word for some parts of the country and where we're sitting today. I think clearly it would go a long way towards solving the problem, assuming it was politically viable, which I don't think that it really is. I think the reality is that for the most part, plans are sold versus bought. Now, obviously, Jeff's firm obviously is targeting small employers with who are tech savvy with easy access via the web, and I think that for a certain segment of the employer population, that could be a very viable means of promoting a cost-effective solution. I think there's a number of organizations we have similar type of capabilities, but yet there are still a lot of folks that when they're sort of going through, Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a small business owner, that this is not, there's a lot of research shared in the first panel, that this is not top of mind. I applaud Holly's sister who had the opportunity to decline bonus and go for the retirement plan to her business owner. I think that she's probably spent time with her sister and is more aware of the issue, and so therefore that was her answer. I don't know that the whole population of that employer would have followed suit. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why, you know, Jamie's comments around open MEPs, you know, I think that could be effective for sure around some degree of easing of administrative burden, you know, sort of mass buying power. But you still have the issue around someone saying, hey, you know what, I'm actually going to become a part of the MEP or sponsor a plan. You know, you sort of need that spark to drive it. You know, and that's why, you know, again, speaking for the 2,000 people that make up the census team, why we're so bullish and supportive of what the states are doing, because whether or not it represents that new floor, as you described it, Ida, but in any event, it's a triggering event. People need to make a proactive decision as the employer to either participate in the state program or perhaps to offer their own plan. Now, that may be their own plan and their own plan document, or, you know, if open MEPs ultimately come to pass, you know, maybe they could join one of those. But I do think that in a world where plans are still really sold versus being bought, you need some kind of triggering event, because that small end of the market for most of the folks who are doing the selling, you know, who are financial intermediaries, you have to be very altruistic when your fees are generally coming off of assets when there's none in a plan. So, you know, that I think is why the state, you know, sort of the public-private partnership, I think could be a very effective one.
Right. Other perspectives here?
Yeah, I take the perspective of the answer is probably B, all of the above. We're supportive of all the state programs in the different forms. I'm a little skeptical that the programs without a mandate will get scale, but I'm willing to be surprised. So it'll be interesting to see how the different state programs roll out. But we're very supportive of the different models, and to some degree competing against them on a healthy level of, like, if your small business would be better served with the 401k because of the higher contribution limits, et cetera, and matching, then that's great. If your small business would be better served with a state-run program like Secure Choice or Oregon Saves, we're supportive of that as well. On the point about 401k plans or retirement services are largely sold rather than bought, I would be a little careful there, and I appreciate that I'm coming from the kind of like other coast perspective on that a little bit. And maybe echoing the question that Jim Gatz from Treasury asked in the first panel, which is there some demographic things afoot here on how younger small business owners make these decisions? And I would argue that there probably are. There's also sort of this elephant in the room, which is the internet, which is buyers are much more educating themselves in their own time. So the notion of having to be sold plans in all segments of the market will need to be sold plans going forward. I'm not sure I totally subscribe to that. We are very much in the segment that, and we're still very small compared to either of the two other private market players represented up here, so we can have the luxury of focusing on folks that will just buy rather than be sold. But selling is more expensive than buying, so it comes with a certain level of additional cost. So if you can use the internet and make things easier, make it a lot easier for people to buy, you know, we may be able to get to the core factors that cause the access gap, which are complexity and cost. So that's the perspective we take. Will the whole market be buying retirement services rather than being sold them in 10 years from now? Probably not. But I do think the market with the internet and younger millennial business owners moving that direction, I think there will be a sort of sea change there.
Great, thanks. Paul?
So 2 points I'd like to make when you think of the public sector plans. One is I hope the rules will allow the private and public sector to compete evenly. And two, we get excited about the states going forward because a mandatory plan is just going to help us. You know, it's even hard for us to look at California, and if all those people have to get a plan in 24 months or something, how would we even handle all the volume? So I don't want to act like we're not excited about it, but I do hope that we can stay on equal footing, because part of the thing that drives our cost today is the mandated costs, right? The cost of having a plan, the compliance. And if some of that goes away, I think even without a mandate, participation would triple, quadruple in a very short period of time.
Let's double down on the cost thing, because I mean, you just mentioned it. We just heard that selling is more expensive than buying. That when you just drill right into it, Jeff, cost and complexity are at the heart of the gap that we see in terms of the small business group. So from all of your perspectives, the plan fees have historically been so much higher for small businesses, either from a technology-driven way to drive down costs or from kind of a policy market-making, public-private. What do you see play out as the future of costs for small businesses? Either because these things work together or because it was already going to happen. I don't know, but I'd just love to have a little bit more from each of your perspectives on the cost equation for small businesses and where that fits into their decision making and how your solutions facilitate maybe a different outcome. And do you want to start?
Sure. So just to be clear, the employer will have zero financial costs, zero fees to participate in Secure Choice. That is not to say that it won't require some amount of time or administrative costs to facilitate the contributions, but we think that's one of the reasons that this is going to be so appealing for them. And from the employee's perspective, our statute caps fees at 1%. We hope that our fees will be much, much lower than that, at least eventually. And I do get the question every now and then from folks in industry saying, well, do you think that your existence will cause some employers to ditch the plans that they already have and move to yours because it's so easy and it's cheap for them? And I think my first instinct on that is to say that I think if it means that they would be moving from a situation where they had a 401k with a match to Secure Choice, that would be a risk, I think, on their part, because it would be a reduction in compensation, essentially. So unless they modified the entire kind of comprehensive compensation package, I don't really see that happening. But I do hope that by bringing 7 million new accounts into this market and by using our leverage as and volume with the state of California and keeping fees statutorily capped, that we can have a positive impact on fees in the market.
Yeah. Any one of you up for grabs?
I would say there's probably some commonality across our three firms because we're technology-enabled services businesses, not asset managers. I can speak for a census. I mean, we need to be able to make money from providing explicit, fully transparent pricing to small employers, and always have been since the founding of the company. So it was really purpose-built to do that. I think that if you're sort of a bundled provider or there's an asset management component there, there are certain fixed costs, especially if you're not used to providing services to small average account balances. The basis points equivalent, can become a pretty big number in the small market until plans start to grow. So I think that, for a firm like Jeff's or Paul's with, the focus on being able to provide the cost at a really aggressive price point for small employers, I think is a big driver of the success of all three of those organizations. I do think historically, small plans did pay more, at least as expressed as basis points, at least until the assets got to be larger from the folks who are in the business primarily to manage money, as opposed to organizations that are there to provide simply the service and make investment products available.
We are a bundled provider, to your point. Like our models very much put everything in the box, so the small business owner doesn't have to go out and find other third-party service providers to add in and get connected into the whole mix of what their solution is for their employees. We're also of the view out in Silicon Valley, we talk about sort of the consumerization of the enterprise. And it's just this notion of trying to make the user experience on software so much more easy and accessible for the small business owner to offer the service, whether it's 401k or payroll or even communication services. Slack is a really interesting example if people have used that. That's a communication tool in Silicon Valley that grew alarmingly fast, like amazingly fast. in part because they just made it really, really easy and accessible. And so our view is, can you take this notion of consumerizing what has historically been B2B or enterprise software services and make it very easy for people to adopt? And one element of that is actually the pricing structure as well. So we are a bundled provider. We're a registered investment advisor. We're an asset manager. But we view ourselves in many ways as a software company or a technology company. So we price the way that people are buying these, small business owners are buying these other services, including payroll in many cases, where it's on a per seat or in the 401k space, per participant basis. So it's basically $100 a year for each participant in the plan. And to distinguish against the state-run plans, that is a cost borne by the employers.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to say, I want to offer this benefit because I'm competing for talent or my employees are demanding it. So it's $8 a month or about $100 a year for each participant, and the employer covers that. And then the employees, we don't put any asset management fees on top of that. They're just getting the underlying mix of low-cost index funds, which are right now 6 or 7 basis points, and that's all they pay for. So to some degree, if you think about our model versus the kind of more traditional asset-based pricing model, we're almost a little more expensive at the very beginning, given most of our plans are de novo or startup plans. Mm-hmm. But then the people signing up with us appreciate that we're going to give them the economies of scale over time as they notionally are getting more bang for their buck on driving more assets into the plan, and our fees stay fixed on a monthly subscription basis rather than an asset basis.
Jeff, one quick question for you. Sure. I mean, because sort of the pricing numbers that you equated to on a per participant basis, you know, for very small plans, very, very much in line with what we do. Yeah. And we give employers the option as to whether or not they want to pay for it, or, you know, there's many different mechanisms to charge it back to the participants. So if an employer is not willing to actually pay for that, are you guys saying, you know, we won't, you know, go find somebody else?
Yeah, we're mindful about what we have kind of religion on in this space to some degree, and the things we have religion on are, we're going to focus on the part of the market, and we're small, much smaller than either of your firms, so we have the luxury of saying we're going to be very targeted at this point and say, like, we want to work with small businesses that are willing and in a position, quite frankly, to pay for this benefit, and if they're not, then they're not right for us. One of the other areas where we have some religion is auto-enrollment. All our plans are auto-enrolled because we believe participation is you know, really important, particularly for younger and lower-paid workers.
And the benefits of that are tremendous. We partner with lots and lots of big financial institutions where we're the service provider and technology provider underneath. So we don't have the, unfortunately, I don't really have the luxury to say, hey, you have to offer auto enrollment. But I think obviously it's a great idea.
And the success you've had, like I'm mindful of, like the Vanguard plan. I know Ascensus is the record keeper on that. It had a lot of tremendous amount of success in the small plan. A little more of the there's a startup segment to it, but also some existing plans, and it's like the auto enrollment is clearly working there, and I think everyone that's looked at the data has come to that. Mm-hmm. So we were able, with a clean sheet of paper 2.5 years ago, to say, like, all our plans are auto enrolled.
Great.
You know, I'd just like to build on the points both my panelists made. First of all, we think of our cost in two ways, or the cost to employer in two ways. One, their time. And we have pretty much automated the process today that can truly be a hands-off process. From the payroll all the way through the compliance testing to the 5500, they can pretty much just walk away from it all. So we feel like that's taken us a long time. We're very proud of that. The second part of the cost is what I charge to the employer. So that's the part I would like it to be less, and if there were less requirements around us, we could probably lower the price. And then the third part about it is how to charge the cost, kind of what you're referring to. We don't really care how you pay us as long as you pay us. So whether it's a per participant fee or an asset fee, we kind of stay agnostic to it.
Do you manage both kinds?
We do manage certainly both kinds. In fact, today the plan that sells the most, they can choose any mutual fund they want, and any money that it pays to us or to the broker, we credit back to the individual participants. And if there wants to be a fee, we just disclose it right there as the fee. And then that way the employer kind of decides how much he wants to pay us monthly, how much he wants to come out of the assets.
I mean, I think when I think about this, Katie, was a lot of this part of what went into the decisions about where the caps were in your plan? You're kind of looking at the future directions of where the industry is going?
Yep, yep.
So do you think it's driving even more competition or driving down cost to where you set it? Or do you know, are you confident that you're going to have applicants to provide in your system that are going to be able to meet that?
We hope so. Yeah, we hope so. And most of that work was based on the analysis that was done in our feasibility study in 2016. But we do hope that it helps drive down costs in the market, in the broader market. And if we need to adjust our statutory cap, then we can do that as we go. But we'll give ourselves a chance to launch and see what happens and see what the effect is in the environment before we move forward with any other changes.
Great. But I'm kind of now thinking back a little bit to, I mean, one, I've heard everybody in some ways supportive of the public-private partnership model. In some, I'll put my own cards on the table. I would love for us not to have to do 50 different versions of that before it becomes a federal policy conversation again. I don't know how quickly we can get there, and I think that it's imperative that when these public-private partnerships develop, that they succeed, right? So that we can learn. I think MyRA comes in as a place where it's like, it's an example of an incredibly important gap that was trying to be filled with something. But the vulnerability in a policy environment at the federal level right now for proactive solutions to happen. So I think that it's lovely that there's other fertile ground where proactive solutions are happening. We see them at the state level, and we see them in the marketplace. And I love that we see them with a lot of traditional players in the marketplace, and also a lot of more new entrants into the marketplace. But when I think about this coverage gap, I want to get us back to the coverage gap, and thinking a little bit about what John Scott was saying about the key research you found with employers who are still, not providing retirement. So I'd like to turn that. I think all of you do your own research in this area in some ways, and have your own insights to add to it about what are the insights you have about when are the right engagement points, what are the barriers that you're overcoming more and more, but just an opportunity to share a little bit about some of the ways that your own insights dovetail with some of the early kind of table setting that we did today. And I don't know, Paul, if you'd like to get that started.
Yeah, a couple points I'd like to make. First of all, somebody was mentioning payroll earlier and the advantage of payroll, and I think really it's not so much that they have the payroll, it's that entrepreneur has a propensity to outsource. And so I think that person has much more likely to try to take on a plan. The fellow who would rather do it themselves instead of paying me $20 is probably not going to start a 401k. So there's some of that involved. Number two is we also talked about the maturity of the business. There is, and we see it because we sell a lot of different products. So when they start up, you need your payroll, you need your workers' comp, there's some things you have to have by law, and we can help you get there and get started. But in generally, at that point, many of those firms, their next investment isn't going to be in benefits, it's going to be in a new truck or a new oven, and you got to get through that hump to where they've got the business at a certain maturity level before I think they start thinking of benefits. And at that point, as mentioned earlier, I think health insurance is clearly first. And then a retirement comes very quickly after that.
Yeah, and I would actually go back to your point earlier on the attachment rate or implied attachment rate at Paychex. I think the numbers are sort of 600,000 payroll clients and 80,000 401k plans. I think that's a relevant data point. We work with a number of the smaller, kind of newer entrants into the sort of cloud-based payroll space. And it depends a little bit on the segment that they're focused on, but you find about the same kind of attachment rate on 401k. And I think you made an important distinction too, which is maybe we get 12 to 15, call it 15% attachment rate to your product, your retirement plan product, but there's another 15% that you can basically see of other providers into your clients with your payroll. And then 70% is the untapped part of it. So there's a lot of white space there, and that's consistent. Gusto, Zenefits, OnPay, a handful of our payroll clients, you see about, or payroll partners I should say, you see about the same mix, which is, we're working towards, if it's a dedicated partnership, towards that 15 or 20% attachment rate on 401k, and they might see another 15% of other providers. But the big thing is the white space in there of sort of 60 to 80% of their clients that don't have a plan today. And that's honestly what gets me out of bed and our team out of bed in the morning, because it's a pretty exciting opportunity. It's an access problem. It's a problem, but it's also an opportunity.
Yeah, I would totally concur with that. I mean, the greenfield opportunity for collectively, both the private sector, public sector, to go out and address this problem, because it's very sizable, and it is a great societal issue, but it also represents a great business opportunity, quite honestly, for those that can participate in it. I mean, I think, our view, small view into the overall marketplace, encompasses 50,000 employers, and I think, the challenge still remains. I reference that sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and John's data around where does this fall, and it falls number 3 or number 4 sometimes, depending on who you ask. And we do the same kind of surveying of our world, and that is the unfortunate reality. So while I think it would be awesome if there could be some kind of a federal mandate, I think that just seems like a bridge too far at the moment. Obviously, at the state level, I think it's being done, and I think that it ultimately will be that spark to help drive better outcomes for so many people. But perhaps another tool, because I think this has to be sort of a multi-pronged approach to solve the problem, would be the open maps, and maybe a combination of those things, will change those numbers. That 55 million Americans that have no access to a workplace retirement plan, needs to come down. And I think using all these different tools that we've got available to us, for sure will change that. I mean, you think about California alone, with 7 million plus, 1 million in Oregon, 1.2 million in Illinois. That's a pretty big chunk out of the 55 million. So.
Yeah, that's a good thing. What about you and your perspective? I mean, you've done a lot of different focus groups. Is there any additional, so 2 things. I'm going to ask this. I'm going to ask all of you to, if you were able to know something else, if there's a research gap that would help you all with your businesses or with addressing this, think about that. And then we're going to come to questions from the audience. So that's going to tee up. So be thinking about your questions. But you've done a lot of focus groups. You've done a lot of research. Is there anything else that sticks out for you in terms of what you've learned that could be helpful to others in this room or in other places around the community you're serving?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything I've heard here. That the only thing I would add is just we get the feedback frequently and loudly that this, from the employer's perspective, that it needs to be designed in a way that's really, really simple and as administratively light for employers as possible. So I think that there is an eagerness out there and an excitement from small business owners that they're excited for the opportunity to offer a benefit that they currently can't or don't offer. So we get that positive feedback, but we also get the clear feedback that we need the employer's role to be as minimal as possible. So we're doing as much work as we can in the design phase before we move to outreach to be accommodating to that.
Yeah. And I know that's the process that Oregon has had to follow as well.
Yeah.
Really quickly, any particular gaps in the kinds of understanding of the market you're trying to serve, or limitations in the technology that you think are going to be brokered or broken through in the near future that should be on our radar screens?
No, I'm always fascinated by the question of motivation versus reducing friction. I just think human nature around consumer finance products is fascinating. I think most people in this room probably would echo that sentiment.
So personal motivation to do something versus just getting rid of the barriers.
Exactly. I mean, to John's point earlier, talking about what are the motivations for small businesses to offer a plan, I think that's really important. As I've gotten older and been in the area and the space longer, I appreciate even more the importance of just literally reducing friction. Simplify, put it right there. Again, fries with your hamburger. How do you make it as simple as possible and frictionless as possible? And I think that in some ways is sort of the behavioral economic view of it, is what actually drives behavior. So any more research around that, the role of motivation versus just purely taking points of friction out, I think is really interesting.
That's great.
Well, that point of friction component, just speaks to the power of saving through workplace-sponsored programs and the power of auto enrollment, and that that is the one thing I think everybody can agree has made a difference in the lives of, while there's 55 million Americans who aren't covered, there are, 80 some odd million plus that are.
Yeah.
And, there's $25 trillion in retirement assets that have been accumulated. So some folks are doing okay, but a lot more need to.
Yeah. Any other insights or wish list stuff, you guys?
Well, just on a really pragmatic basis, we spend a lot of our time thinking about how to plan our outreach and marketing and education work, because I think we can all recognize that a program like Secure Choice is going to succeed based on how well we do all of that outreach and marketing. So to the extent that we can all sort of be innovative about the ways that we in California, think about it not as a kind of monolithic group of 7 million people, but, segment that into, we know for sure 2/3 work for small businesses, 2/3 are people of color in California, a lot of women. Latinos alone represent nearly half of our 7 million population. So, we're doing sort of extensive, in-depth engagement with our stakeholder and advocacy communities right now to help inform us on how do we be culturally competent, how do we not only educate but persuade that this is a program that we want people to not opt out of. So to the extent we can do research on effective marketing and outreach.
And is it primarily just to employers, or are you also looking at the employees when you're doing this?
Both.
You're doing both.
Absolutely. We're sort of putting a first priority on employers because they're the ones that are subject to the requirement, and we need them to fully understand what the program is and isn't. And I think to some extent the advocates who worked so hard for so many years, for the past 8 or 9 years, to get the legislation passed, are doing a really, really good job right now already of kind of establishing grassroots education and outreach. But it's not quite as robust on the employer side right now, so we're trying to focus on that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Questions from the audience? A lot. So let's go back there and then to you, and then we'll come over here, sir.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah. Carl Pulzer again. Great ideas about aggregating employers either through the private sector, through these multiple employer organizations and states. But I think there are two elements to everybody getting in the system. One is the institutional setting, which is good here. The other is the money. It's the employees' money that comes out of their wages that goes into the retirement, and they don't have enough at the bottom half. So that brings up tax policy.
Yeah, the question?
Is there a role for redistributing the tax breaks that we now have, where for the bottom fifth of the population, they get about $20 of a tax break. For the top, about $4,500. If everybody had a $1,000 tax credit, there would be $50 billion in a new market for financial markets. And if the source of that money was from the top, the financial markets there wouldn't shrink at all. So I think the tax policy is important, and it's important even though it can't get passed now to bring it up.
No, it's
Okay?
great.
Tax
Go ahead and
policy.
get the other questions on the table, and then think about how you want to respond to any or all of these. Yes, so we'll go with Red, and then just over here, David, next. The gentleman with the tall guy, right here, behind me.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mindy Reiser. I spoke earlier. Jeff, this is for you, but other folks can chime in. We just heard there are $25 trillion in retirement assets. I'm wondering how the younger folks in the tech industry are interrogating where their money is being invested, okay? We have in this country lots of discussion about America First. We need to support American business. Retirement funds invest where there are interesting risks, interesting possibilities of profit. How are your folks, the well-educated techie guys and gals, looking at where their money is invested, and do they have priorities and no-nos?
Yeah, let me start. Oh, sorry.
Let's get the other question on here, and then because we've got a policy conversation, we've got a little bit of culture conversation around people's preferences around investments.
I'm John Turner from the Pension Policy Center, and my question is very closely related to the first question. I read a study recently which was surprising to me, but it said that a lot of people do not have, and a lot of workers do not have any federal income tax liability. And I knew that was true, but the number was something like, it could be as high as 40% in some years. And so my question is, if there's no income tax incentive to participate in a pension, do you think these workers should participate, or do you think that they will? There's two parts of it.
So I'm going to do my best. Thank you, and then raise your hand so David can see if you've got other questions, because I think we have time for another round of questions here. The tax policy conversation is interesting because both of these, I think you're referring to the individual taxpayer with both of your questions, and we're talking right now about incenting small businesses, what incents them. So I'm going to add to your question. I'm going to say, on the one hand, how does tax policy, corporate tax policy or business tax policy, play into the decision making? And I think this is a question near and dear to our heart at Aspen, and I know many of the folks in the room. How do we think about changing some of the asymmetries, and who gets incented to save in this country and who doesn't, and what is a meaningful way to rethink that and to make it fair, just full stop. But that's a different question than the small business one, so feel free to opine on the second, but I think for your own kind of work, the first one might be more proximate to what you know about motivation and
well, one comment that's probably understood in the room, but just for the lowest income cohort of folks, assuming there's some kind of a solution in place by 2034, Social Security does provide a pretty substantial for lower income workers, income replacement ratio. So that social safety net,
let me push you on that to what level? What do you think? What income quintile do you think that is true? Because I think this is one of those things we actually need to figure out.
Well, I would, in my mind, I'm thinking, folks that are making, say, $35,000 annually.
Okay. My own sense of that is it's going to change as more people are in gig jobs and 1099 jobs, and how many of them actually paid in to Social Security consistently and not. So
and that is a big issue. The 55 million can be 75 million in terms of people who don't have access to a workplace plan if you include, the burgeoning gig economy.
Right. So, but anyway, but I digress. Go ahead. Anybody?
Well, I think ultimately these are employer-sponsored plans, right? The business owners are the individuals that are looking at them as a benefit to, attract and retain their employees. Ultimately, the tax benefit status at the individual employee level is probably not the driver behind the owner's decision to offer a plan or not. The owners obviously have benefits associated with them, tax benefits that inure to them by offering a plan, but that alone isn't the only driver behind why companies have them. In fact, I know that John Scott's data actually, in my mind, actually was surprisingly low in terms of how much the tax advantage nature of a qualified retirement plan plays into the thinking among the decision makers that opt to offer one to their employees. But I think it's, I think it's an important component. But I think if you're an employee, you may say, okay, well, you know what? I'm not paying any income taxes this year. So the fact that I have this money taken out pre-tax, what does that really mean? I don't know. I don't know how many folks actually stop and think about it that way. I think they, particularly if there's a match, I think that people, are attracted to participating in the programs and that they can save for it. I'll give a very funny story. So my daughter, she was younger at the time. She was in high school. She never really knew exactly what I did. So, I think she thought I ran like nursing homes or something like that, places for people to retire, But she got to, go to work for a day and see what Dad does. And she and her friends were sitting out on the deck of our house, and she was like, wow, when we get out of school and get jobs, we have to go work at a company that offers these things called 401k plans. It's unbelievable. If you put money away, the company matches it. They give you money. They just give it to you. She was like totally inspired by it. And I think that I think hopefully is the mentality that a lot of employees will have if their company is actually sponsoring a plan. And I don't know whether, at her age, she wasn't worried about income taxes, and I think that for a lot of employees, that's probably not the first thing they think about either.
Let me switch to Katie here, and then I want to come back around the culture question, and we can say more. And we can also refer to you 10 other conversations that are going to happening in DC daily about the broader set of tax reform conversations as well. So I want to make sure we touch on it, but I want to make sure we get the other questions in as well.
Yeah, just very, very briefly on the employee's perspective, and particularly focused on the low-income folks, which I think was a thread in both of those questions. We're working really, really hard to design the program in a way that works for low-income people, people with very volatile income. So we have heard the feedback loud and clear from our stakeholders representing workers and labor and lower-income people that it's really important that people have access to their money in cases of emergency. So we are, staff are recommending to our board, and the board has not voted on it yet, that we go with a Roth IRA model following Oregon and Illinois' decision there, which of course is difficult because we're balancing the desire to motivate people and encourage people to save long-term and treat it like a long-term investment and not touch it, with the very, very strong feedback that we've gotten that, we're talking about people, many of whom are unbanked even, who are not used to saving, and it's going to be a deduction, and they need to, they will opt out if they don't think that they have access to that money. So that's one thing. And then another thing we're considering along those lines is something else that Oregon is doing with their capital preservation fund. So essentially having a sidecar fund of cash that is essentially more liquid that people can access. So I don't know if that was really the spirit of the questions, but it's something that we are thinking about in California and taking very, very seriously.
I mean, it's a whole different set of considerations, a whole different bundle than the one we're talking about up here. I think to think about how do lower income households and knowledge about how they earn and how they save or can't save, how you actually get them to be able to accumulate, and so refundable credits, more aligned incentives, the sidecar accounts, understanding needs for liquidity, all of those things kind of coming together. Let's move to the, and we can switch this out, but this would really be the last, ideally we get answers on your question. If there's any other questions, we'll do them, but otherwise just a final comment from you all I think would be great. So, in terms of this choice and where are people's investment preferences going, and is that driving some of the work? I guess that was mainly your question, right, in that way?
Yeah, the one clarifying point I would make, we do have a lot of technology startups as our clients. It's sort of, we shouldn't talk about the small business market as like a monolithic thing. There's sort of three segments. We have a lot of professional service firms, generally higher compensated folks, technology workers, and then the third is like a mix of everything else. We have clients in 49 states. All our new customer service people, one of the first questions we ask them is, do you speak Spanish? Because we have a good flow of small businesses in California that need that for their employees. So it is a broad mix. To your point on millennials and the investment products, I think they get the joke. I think they've figured out that for the most part, like financial products and investment products have been really expensive for a long time, and they are looking to find a way to drive that down. And you can see that in the asset flows, whether it's going to low-cost index funds or out of more expensive actively managed funds. I mean, Vanguard's pulling in like $1 billion a day, mostly in really low-income or low-cost mutual funds or index funds. So our model is to dive right into that. So it's the investment products or index funds that our end participants are using are 6 or 7 basis points. So they're paying $6 for every $10,000 that they have invested. That goes to the mutual fund companies that we work with to invest on behalf of our clients.
Were you asking about socially responsible investing, perhaps?
I'm interested in that.
Okay, I'll take a different angle. You guys may have something to add on that. I didn't realize that was a question.
Yeah, and briefly, yeah.
We hear that a lot. We give them the choice. They can take a custom portfolio that has socially responsible funds in it. Only a very small minority actually do. So it comes up a lot, but in terms of actually where the people make their investment choices, it's a higher cost, and I think when they see that, they have second thoughts.
I think that's yes. There's a lot of talk around socially responsible investing. oftentimes, sponsors will have that in the lineup, but in terms of how much of the assets ultimately find their way into those investment vehicles, it's not as much as what you would expect based on how much it's talked about.
Right. So real fast, I guess, is a lightning round, just sum up. Most people that talk to me know that one of my first questions will be looking at how far out should I look to solve this problem? What is the momentum for change? So I would love to ask you guys, 5 years out or 10 years out, how much of the coverage gap that we've been talking about today is realistically solvable, and what is the driving thing that would have made it different? Opine.
To me, I see the states driving it. I think that's the biggest impetus we're going to have out there, and as long as they continue to drive it, I think we'll continue to see quick and drastic change.
Great.
Yeah, I'm bullish on where things go over the next 10 years. I think the state programs, I think the rise of the millennials into their working career, professional careers, and then I think the internet in terms of small business owners and their employees educating themselves on their own time, I think will have a pretty big impact on this problem over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I meuld concur what everybody said. I mean, just the 3 states alone, Oregon, Illinois, and California would sort of, carve out, almost 10 million out of the 55. That's a pretty good start.
Yep. We have a 7.5 million person hole right now in California, and we hope within 10 years to have 6 million people in the program. So
no pressure, Katie.
Yep.
I'll have you back in 5 and talk about it. I want to just wrap up thanking this panel. Thank all of you for joining us and for sharing so much of your work. Also thanking Treasurer Reed and Jamie Calamarides from Prudential for their work and remarks to frame up the solution buckets, as you will. Thanks to Pew and the Bipartisan Policy Center for partnering with Aspen's Financial Security Program on this, which was really fun, and we'll have to do it again. And the only reason I'll say that is because I want to thank specifically David Mitchell on my team for really orchestrating that and kind of driving a great work plan, and the rest of the team here for that as well. Thanks very much. We'll do recaps of this. We're going to continue to drill down on different specific ways that we can hit this coverage gap in America, and the growing number of leaders who are really stepping up to talk about what it's going to take to make the change is encouraging to me, and that's what gets me out of bed every day. So thanks to all of you, and have a great day. Thank you.